My guest today is Delaine Eastin, Democratic candidate for governor. Delaine is a former state superintendent, assemblyperson, city council member, businesswoman, and college professor. A woman running for governor of California. It is a privilege. You have a very impressive political resume. Could you bring us up to speed on your experience thus far?
Well, I started out on the Planning Commission in Union City, and I thought, well, I'm going to write the definitive textbook on California state and local government. And I somehow got so engaged. Union City was the fastest growing community in this Bay Area at that time, really. And so I wound up actually being campaign manager for someone. And the night she got reelected, she said, in 2 years, we're going to run you. And I did run. And I was wonderfully influenced by some spectacular people. We had a great city manager, and he'd done outreach, and we'd gotten a grant to look at our housing stock. And they said Union City had too much of the same kind of housing. It was all first-time homes. So if you wanted to move up, you had to move out. And there really weren't many apartments. And we had a BART station, and it made sense for us to have some other different styles of housing. And so we wound up getting into a wonderful plan where we worked with the school district and focused on attendance, and within 5 years, James Logan High School became a top 10 feeder for affirmative action at UC Berkeley. The schools got so much better, and the city got so much better, and we were all a team. And it was bipartisan, it was multinational. You know, we had a lot of immigrants in Union City, always have had. And so it went from being a town with some sketchy crime problems to a wonderful community of neighbors. And it's still that today. So I went from there to the Assembly. I served in the California State Assembly, and for 8 years I was the first woman to represent that part of the state. And then I went to be the first, and still the only woman, to be the state superintendent of public instruction. And while I was on the city council, I worked for a big company. I was in accounting, so I know a lot about accounting, but I was also a corporate planner, so I know about long-range planning. And after my time as superintendent, I was executive director of the National Institute for School Leadership in Washington, D.C., and then I was a Mills College professor. So I've had a wonderful life.
You certainly have. You specialize in education. That's one of your specialties. As governor, you will address many other issues, and you have had experience with many other issues in the past. What other issues are central to your campaign?
Well, I like to say I'm going to fight for children's education from preschool to graduate school. In addition to that, though, I have a lot of experience in transportation, for example. So I won the MTC Legislator of the Year Award, and I was the first woman and the first member of the Assembly to win it, because I did work to make sure that the half-cent sales tax counties could keep their promises to their constituents. And imagine what gridlock we'd be in the Bay Area if we hadn't had every single county in the Bay Area, except Solano, has passed a half-cent sales tax. And we were able to get some things done. I was very active in environmental safety, and we had wonderful examples in Alameda County of problems with garbage. So the city of San Leandro got an old landfill for $1. Great deal, huh?
Hey.
100 acres on the bay, except that it was a toxic site. And so I wrote the biggest landfill cleanup bill in the state's history. It put a tipping fee on garbage. Some haulers didn't like it at all, but there were a few that honestly understood that we had to take responsibility for these old dumps. And so I wrote the biggest landfill cleanup bill in state's history. I wrote the bill that disallows you from dumping white goods, which are washers, dryers, refrigerators, loaded with chemicals, leach into the groundwater.
Of course.
And so I had the bill that said if you make glass bottles in California, you must use a minimum content of recycled glass. Because, in fact, all that glass from the CRVs on your bottles, it was all going to the landfill, because it was cheaper to buy sand and make the bottle from scratch. So I had a progressive, each year you had to use a higher percentage of recycled glass, and it eliminated the problem of all that glass going to landfill.
Wow.
So I've been active in things like cracking down on unsafe contractors who really were building unsafe houses and were allowed to build multiple houses. And I got a lot of plaudits not only from the contractors playing by the rules, but by the building trades, because in fact we needed to make houses safe in California. Especially first-time homes, there were a lot of young people, young families buying homes that had mold and different things, because the people building them didn't know what they were doing, and they were allowed, without a license, to build 20 houses a year. And there were just a number of things that I was able to do in my career, and I'm very, very up on things like long-range planning. It's horrifying for me to sit here today and tell you the last long-range plan for water in California was done under Governor Brown. That would be Pat Brown.
Yeah, Pat Brown. Oh my goodness.
1957 was the last water plan. And so we haven't done long-range planning in so many areas, infrastructure generally. This year there's a new transportation plan out, but there's not a long-term infrastructure plan, and we do have problems with privately held infrastructure like San Bruno Mountains explosion, as well as public sector. A lot of these old, sewers are in really bad shape. Right. And meanwhile, there's a lot of talk of the twin tunnels, which I'm not in favor of, but I do think there needs to be a long-range plan. And why aren't we infusing some of our aquifers that have been dropped so low with some of this rain that we're now letting go out into the ocean?
Right, right. Good points. My next question, what do you see as California's most pressing issue? That sounds like one of them, but...
Education. You know, we are living in a time where we have the finest research universities in the world are in America, and a lot of them are here in California. Our research says the steepest curve of learning is 0 to 5. And yet we, who kept preschools after the Second World War when the federal funding ran out, it wasn't for everybody, but we kept what we had, because so many women were in the workforce, the federal government put them in all 48 states. Well, there are more women in the workforce today, and yet childcare is as expensive for some families as college. Mm-hmm. It is very dangerous that we have children in unsafe settings, which we have latchkey kids under the age of 5 in the state of California.
Whoa.
It's just terrifying, and so we need to invest in preschool. You know, we need to invest in kindergarten being mandatory. Did you know it's not mandatory in California?
No, I did not.
There's 15 states where it's mandatory and 35 where it isn't, and we're one of the 35.
I didn't know that kindergarten was not mandatory in the state of California. How is that even possible?
Well, we put a bill on the governor's desk and he vetoed it. He said it was too expensive. And, you know, it's pay me now or pay me later. We are at 46 of the 50 states in per pupil spending. This is the most expensive state in the union. It has the highest percentage and number of poor children. It has the highest percentage and number of English learners. We were 5th, tied with New York, when I graduated from high school. To be 46th now when we have so many more poor kids. And when I graduated, there were 1 out of 10 kids was poor. Now it's 1 out of 4. And so California needs to invest in reducing class size, especially in early elementary, and I was K-3 20 or less in kindergarten through 3rd grade class size. But beyond that, we need to invest in counselors, in psychologists. We have a lot of kids who have really difficult lives and challenges, and to the extent that we can help them at school, they can learn better, they can learn more. We also have to invest in more nurses. It was a nurse who called my mother and said, you know, have her eyes checked. She needs to wear glasses. And by heavenly days, the nurse was right. We need to invest in librarians and more in infrastructure in terms of technology. And we definitely need to help more of our kids to be on paths to college and or to career. We need the kids to have a great education. And either we're going to pay to educate them or we're going to pay to incarcerate them, to put them on welfare, to have them in unemployment lines, to have marginal lives instead of wonderful lives. You know, I'm a machinist's daughter. My mother's a dress clerk. I got to go to the finest university in the world. And at that time, it was like people understood if we educate them, they make more money, they pay more taxes, they're better citizens. It's a win-win-win for everybody.
Totally. This is a great conversation I would like to continue. We'll be right back with Delaine Eastin. We're back with Delaine Eastin, Democratic candidate for governor of California in 2018. We were talking about education before we broke, and I'd like to continue. 2 words, Betsy DeVos. Go.
Well, honestly, I don't think there's ever been a less qualified person nominated to be the Secretary of Education, certainly not in my lifetime. If she was applying to be the CEO of a corporation or the executive director of a nonprofit, and she showed up before the board of directors as ill-prepared as she was to be the Secretary of Education, she'd have been laughed out of the room. I serve on a number of boards for nonprofits. I've been an executive director of one, and I've been in the private sector, and I just have never seen anybody that was that how to say, off kilter and uninformed. And, you know, but it's part of this whole idea that they're going to move us away from any federal role in education. She's there to destroy the department, not to build it. She's there to wreck federal support for education, not support it.
I need to just take that in for a sec, because that's devastating. It's devastating to hear. In your eyes, what is California's role in the greater national arena as it pertains to education or just in general?
There's a jingle I like a lot that is, so sing my friends, be blithe, be gay, or weep my friends with sorrow. What California is today, the rest will be tomorrow.
Yay. So you're going to make your mark here in California.
Yes, we're doing some things right in California in terms of protecting our environment. That's a good thing, and we should build on that. Mm-hmm. We're doing some things, though, mediocre or even badly. And, you know, we need a reinvestment in education in California. We must have that. We must understand that in a global economy where you're competing not just with our first world counterparts in Europe, but, you know, they say the BRICS, beware the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Singapore. There is, in fact, global competition, and they're spending a lot on education. So we need to reinvest in that. We need to reinvest in our infrastructure. I'm sorry, but if it hadn't been for the 23 counties that have half-cent sales taxes, the gridlock that you're in right now would be 10 times worse. Yeah. It's been locals stepping up that have allowed us to do anything. It's the locals that agreed to help us modernize BART. So there are things that California can and should be doing, and we're capable of it. You know, the voters stepped up to help the San Francisco Bay. If we're asked, we do the right things. When Arnold Schwarzenegger tried to steal the money from First Five, from the youngest among us, the voters had to be asked, partly because I was part of a lawsuit when previous governor had stolen some money.
Thank you for that.
So they had to put it on the ballot, and by a 2-to-1 vote, the voters said no. It was almost 2-to-1.
Now, had you not brought that to the attention of us California residents, would that have just gone?
Well, what happened earlier on, another governor had taken the money from what's called Prop 99. It was a proposition that taxed certain tobacco products, had zero taxation. Chewing tobacco, pipe tobacco, snuff, and believe it or not, cigars. So they put a tax on those products and they put it into a fund to educate kids about the dangers of smoking. And they moved that money over into another category, and they said they hated to do it, but they had to do it.
They had to.
It was a gift to the tobacco industry. The only thing they hated worse than the tax was that you would use that money to educate kids about the dangers of smoking. It was crass and thuggery. And, you know, I was part of the lawsuit, and we won. They said, from now on, when the voters vote to tax themselves to do something, you must ask their permission to take the money. And that's how we kept the money in First Five.
What would you do differently from Governor Brown? If you're elected governor, what is Delaine Eastin going to do differently?
There are certain things that the governor gets an A on. He's really been good on the environmental issues, and he's been good on balancing the budget. I think, though, there are some things we all want to have an honest conversation about. The Twin Tunnels are really a peripheral canal with a roof on them. The voters voted down the peripheral canal. And so I don't believe that his water plan is a good one in the sense that some of the money he uses to fix water in California that goes to that very expensive project, when in fact there are so many other things we ought to be thinking about, like putting money into the aquifers and, like, you know, strengthening the current existing dams. But we need to protect the most vital delta in this country right now is the San Francisco Bay Delta. And as somebody who's been a member of San Francisco Bay Association ever since I was in graduate school and did a paper on the politics of Bayfill, you know, it would be wrong to hurt the Delta. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for the quality of life. It's not good in the long run for the water systems of California. So let's step back and do it right, and then let's pay as you go. His father, you know, did the water plan by charging more money for water, which, by the way, also encourages conservation. So we really need to, the things we cannot charge people for, like education, we need to step up and do. But if you want to build a sexy high-speed rail, you know, you really need to identify a revenue stream to do that. And you have to tell the public the truth about what it's going to cost and what a ticket on that train is going to cost.
Right.
It's going to be the most expensive train ride in the country. It's only going to be for the rich. And by the way, it's going to cost so much more than they've projected. And so if we want to do it, let's do something like a gas tax. And if the voters want to do it, they'll vote for that. If they don't want to do it, then we shouldn't do it. But they should be asked, do you want to do this project at this cost, and this is how we're going to pay for it, upfront and on purpose.
Right, and then spend the money as they say.
Yeah, which is what Europe and Japan do, and China. You know, they do charge money. You know, when you go to Europe, people say, oh, well, they're no more expensive than us. No, it's a liter. They're charging for a liter what we're charging for a gallon. There are 3.75 liters in a gallon of gas.
Right.
They're putting that money into their infrastructure. I'm not saying that kind of an increase is necessary, but I do think that we have to have an honest conversation about how we're going to fix our roads and not just borrow the money, because that's foolish.
And how we're going to get from Oakland to San Jose in under 2 hours on a weekday.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
or make it to the city to go do our jobs and have quality time with our families.
Right.
These are important issues that people discuss around the dinner table, or, you know, through their exhaustion when they finally do get home and when they finally do get their kids to bed after their 1.5 hour commute to go 13 miles or whatever.
But, you know, one of the great sins of California is that we, in a period of time from 1985 to the present, we went from 15% of our state budget going for higher ed down to under 12%. Prisons went from 3% up to 9%. And when the voters turned the prison bonds down twice, you know what they did? They stopped asking us. You haven't voted on a prison bond in 20 years. They stopped asking us because we said no, and they're still building them. And it outrages me.
I'm outraged as you're saying it. I'm boiling.
Yeah, budgets are statements of values. If you looked at the budget of California, you'd say we'd have put increasing emphasis on prisons over the years and actually de-emphasized higher ed and education generally.
This is perhaps not a quick question, but I'm going to ask you for a quick answer. So currently no Republicans hold statewide positions in California, and there is not going to be a Republican governor anytime soon. Your real competition comes from within your own party, the Democratic Party. Why are you the best candidate for governor?
Well, I have the broadest background. I've done the work that in the private sector, in the public sector. I've served at the local level. I've served in the legislature. I've been the state superintendent of public instruction. And then I left office and did some other things. I'm not a career politician, but I do know how to move the needle. And when I was superintendent of public instruction, I moved us from 47th in per pupil spending to 27th. We're back down to 46th. So somebody who really has budgets as statements of values in their heart and believes the most important thing the state of California does is educate its children should be at the helm of the state. And I think most smart people know that.
Excellent point. We're going to take one more break, and we will be right back with Delaine Eastin. We're back with Delaine Eastin, candidate for governor of California in 2018. Delaine, how can we stand up to the Trump administration's stance on immigration and the way they're treating our immigrants?
Well, I would say that it's really important for Californians to have courage, vision, and heart. The courage to stand up first and foremost. The vision to understand that the future will be made by the young people that are living in our state and going to our schools right now. And the heart to be compassionate and caring. At the end of the day, in 1994, when I ran for superintendent of public instruction, Pete Wilson went after the immigrants. He was governor and he had 187 on the ballot. And he said teachers were supposed to check and make sure the kids were here legally. And the night I was elected, it was only 3 out of 8 constitutional officers that were Democrats, 5 Republicans. We lost the assembly. People forget this was a red state for most of my life. In the end, Pete Wilson turned us blue. It took a few years, but he turned us blue by going after the immigrants. So I think we all have to keep cool, be calm, but stand steadfast with our immigrant residents and with those children who are going to our schools. And we must understand that, in fact, in the end, the court overthrew 187. The governor threatened to have me recalled for opposing him on it. And then when it passed, he said, I expect you to enforce it. And I said, well, we'll wait and see what the court says. But I'm not inclined to tell the teachers of this state. I don't know any teacher that went through the process of becoming a teacher that wanted to become an immigration and naturalization police officer. And so at the end, the court backed me up. I opposed 209 and I opposed 227. But the 227 was English only, and the voters just recently overwhelmingly turned that around. Yes, it would be good if our kids were learning multiple languages, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Like the rest of the world's children are learning multiple languages. And so even in the case of 227, there were a bunch of dual language immersion schools that existed in California. And there's a provision in the Ed Code that says if every parent volunteers to do something, that the superintendent of public instruction can grant a waiver and allow that school to do that. So all of the dual language immersion schools stayed in process. They all continued to do what they were doing because I gave them all waivers. People threatened me, but I won the day. And my niece was in dual language immersion in San Jose. She was fluent in French. She was in high school because she'd learned Spanish in elementary school. She learned French in high school. She learned Russian in college. She's now an adult learning Finnish at the Finnish embassy in Washington, D.C.
See?
You get one language, you get a second language, then it's easy to get the third, the fourth, and the fifth.
Invest in the children. I almost just said this, and I'm going to say it. It's cheesy. Invest in the children for a better tomorrow, right?
It's pay me now or pay me later. We're either going to pay to educate them or we're going to pay to incarcerate them. We're going to pay to educate them or we're going to pay to put them on welfare and unemployment. The research is amazing in terms of the value of preschool, in terms of the number of kids that don't wind up dropping out, in terms of the kids that do go on to college, in terms of the skill and ability of children who have those early learning opportunities as well as good experiences from K to 12. And I will just say to you, I think it's a miracle to me that a bunch of people coming out of a depression and a war figured that out. By 1965, 9 out of 10 UC campuses were built and open. All but 3 CSUs were built and open. All but 2 of the main campuses of the community college were built and open. We've managed to build 6 measly college and universities in 50 years. During that period of time, we built 19 prisons.
A travesty.
Budgets are statements of values. I want to say our values are like my parents' values. I got accepted at UC Davis, and they wanted a new car. They had an old 10-year-old car, and they stopped making that brand, and my mother wanted a new couch. My brother and I had done our trampoline skill on the old one, and my dad wanted to go to the family reunion because his mother had recently passed. This was the first time they were all getting together, and they wanted to send their daughter to college. So you know what happened? No car, no couch, no trip to Kentucky. Instead, they sent their daughter to college. And it was a heavy lift for them. Because living away from, even though UC was much less expensive in those days, living away from home in California is always expensive. And so I got to go to UC Davis, and it was life-changing. Just like their decision to buy the little house that cost more in the better school district. Right.
I'd love for you to share some final thoughts, how people can get on the Delaine Eastin train, how we can reach you.
Well, there is a website, and it's Delaine for FOR Governor. And you can go online and you can look and see how we're going to run a grassroots campaign. This is going to be about regular people doing lots of little things. And I'm not going to have the most money of any candidate. I think that's a fact. But I am not also the one that's just worried about the big city stature and the big fundraisers. I'm the one who wants to worry about the future. I look at the horizon, and I'm always looking at the horizon. I'm not just looking right here. What's fashionable today? How can I raise a bunch of money today by being for some sexy project? I'm for what'll be good for California in the long run. And I've demonstrated, I think, in my record that that's what I've always cared about.
It has been an honor, Delaine, to get to know you and to have you here on the Lady Brain Show, and thank you so much.
It is my honor.